Verse 334. The yogin who disciplines himself in the exercises is not to be engaged in buying and selling. If necessary, let the attendant see to it. These are the regulations I teach. I live in a small seaside town in the northeast of England. It's a little bit out of the way. So it was a bit of an event when quite recently a Tibetan Lama came to visit. A couple of people had notified me through Facebook of this event. And normally I wouldn't be particularly interested. These tend to be rather simpering affairs. And the blurb which attended this visit was pointing out how important this Lama is. He'd attended a dinner party with the Queen apparently. And then I realised it was Lama Yeshe, who's very big in the world of Tibetan Buddhism. He's head of one of the Tibetan schools of Buddhism. And he's also responsible for one of my favourite places, the Holy Isle in the west of Scotland. And it seems he wanted to open a centre here in this small seaside town. So I felt this is something worth supporting. So I went along and I realised it'd been a bit of a mistake. I was sitting somewhere near the front in the middle in a well-attended room. I felt like I was back in Sunday school being harangued for being a naughty boy. We Westerners seem to like gentlemen of exotic ethnicity telling us how rubbish our values are. It was very uncomfortable. I wanted to leave, but since I was jammed in near the front, I couldn't really leave without making too much of a fuss. I didn't want to make a fuss. So there was Lama Yeshe telling us how we should get rid of our mobile phones, we shouldn't need money, and telling us how he doesn't have any money, how he gets by, he doesn't worry about anything. And I thought, well, yes, but you've got this big support network supporting you. You've got secretaries, you've got people who'll be telling you, who'll be organising your itineraries for you and everything else. So it's a little bit ingenuous to say the least, I thought. He had all his attendants. It's okay not to have money if you've got other people to look after your needs, and that's guaranteed. So it was quite uncomfortable, but eventually I settled into appreciating his charm. He seems like a very nice fellow, and I couldn't help but agree with some of the points he was making. Basically, he wants people to be happy, and they're not happy because their minds are all a bit mixed up. So he wants to help people get their minds sorted out. We can't really argue with that. Although it seems that he does a few hours meditation every morning, and he spent 12 years in solitary retreat. 3 years is the usual number. It's about 3 years. He must have done 4 of them. So I think if you get interested in Tibetan Buddhism, this is probably what you'll be thinking that you have to do. If you're serious about it, you really should be thinking in terms of a 3-year retreat. And this takes quite a lot of support. I met somebody in the Holy Island when I was there, and he wanted to go on one of these retreats. And when I got home from my visit, I found a letter from him asking if I would donate to this. And I thought, yes, he was a fine fellow, I'll support him in this. So I sent him some money. And it wasn't until some years later that I went back to the Holy Isle, and I asked about this fellow. And it seems that he'd only just managed to get away on this retreat after several years. It'd taken him quite a long time to raise the money. And I suppose I have to agree with Lama Yeshe. One of the great things about Tibetan culture and about Indian culture is that there's widespread support for the spiritual aspirant. It seems to be inbuilt into these cultures. Of course, there are a great deal of rogues who take advantage of this. Your average sadhu in India, in general, has nothing holy about him whatsoever. But the point is that as materialistic as a society like India is, it still acknowledges this spiritual dimension. And we don't have anything like this in the West, not that I can think of. People are very generous, they give to charities and so on. They might donate to their local church or their local mosque or temple. We've got them all here in the UK. But in general, there's no support for individuals who are engaged in what's being promoted in these videos. So this talk of an attendant is very much dependent on a particular culture. And if we get right down to it, the Enlightenment practitioner has no need for an attendant. The Buddha himself had an attendant. Most of the time it was his cousin Ananda, but before Ananda there were one or two others that were in attendance on him. I suspect they probably operated like personal secretaries, although Ananda did give the Buddha a massage now and again, which I'm sure was much appreciated. But the benefits would have been more for the attendant rather than for the spiritual practitioner. And unless you're part of that particular culture, it's probably a good idea to give up any idea of having an attendant. It's liable to create havoc with the ego. In the previous verses, basic living situations have been addressed. Things like what you wear, where you sleep, possessions, how you interact with society. These are of concern to the Enlightenment practitioner because of their everyday nature. Because of their everyday nature, we don't pay attention to them, and we don't pay attention to the way in which the ego mind inhabits them. And this is what has to be flushed out. If you're an Enlightenment practitioner, you cannot have any blind spots. So what's the problem with being engaged in buying and selling? Buying and selling is something which can take over. I think we're looking here at the mentality which is concerned with making a profit. I've got a lot of admiration for people that can do this. But it's something that you have to inhabit. You have to be on the continuous lookout for how you can make a profit-making opportunity. My own relationship with money has been a tricky one. I always feel that I don't have enough. And probably by local standards, by Western standards, we live very minimally. But we have everything we need. I would like not to have to think about money, because living in the West, you do have to put out rather a lot of money just to live in a house and to get by. It can cause quite a lot of anxiety, because you do need to have money coming in. And if you don't have this money coming in, then things can get very difficult. So this is an interesting anxiety to deal with. It could be dealt with by having a substantial amount of money. But given that I don't have a substantial amount of money, I have to deal with it on the level on which it appears, and that is as an anxiety. It's part of my psychological disposition. Objectively, I'm actually in a situation I've always wanted to be in. I have a job which demands very little of my resources. I have a lovely wife. I have some time. I live in a nice place. So the anxiety I feel, I suspect, is rather independent of the situation. It's part of my samskara. So this anxiety is not one that I can pass on to an attendant. It's one that needs to be dealt with as part of what's described here as disciplining myself in the exercises